Israel is now facing one of its most alarming moments in decades. Panic has begun to grip Tel Aviv after Egypt officially deployed 40,000 military personnel to the Northern Sinai, a border area directly adjacent to Israel. This unprecedented move is seen as Egypt's boldest military maneuver in more than 40 years. According to Middle East Monitor, the scale of the deployment far exceeds the limitations set by the 1979 Camp David Accords, which originally restricted Sinai to remain a demilitarized zone. But this time, the situation is different. The presence of 40,000 soldiers signals that Cairo is on high alert. Thousands of troops have been stationed at strategic outposts across northern Sinai. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, serving as commander-in-chief, personally ordered the deployment. In his statement, al-Sisi made it clear, Egypt cannot remain silent while Israel continues its campaign to drive Palestinians from Gaza. Egypt has informed Israel that this massive deployment is strictly defensive. Yet analysts argue the message goes far beyond defense. It is a serious warning that Israel's unchecked aggression will no longer go unanswered. This development raises a pressing question. Will the Camp David Accords, once considered untouchable, collapse under the weight of Israel's brutality? And could this be the beginning of a new direct confrontation in the region? The Camp David Accords of 1979 were once hailed as a cornerstone of peace in the Middle East. The agreement, brokered by the United States, required Egypt to withdraw its forces from the Sinai Peninsula in exchange for Israel's commitment to recognize Egypt's sovereignty and end hostilities. For more than 4 decades, the accords largely held, preventing any large-scale Egyptian military presence near the Israeli border. But today, that fragile balance is being shaken. By sending 40,000 troops into Sinai, Egypt is openly defying the limits once set in stone. Military experts warn this could mark the most significant breach of Camp David since its signing. Israel, which has relied on that agreement to secure its southern frontier, is now facing the reality of a heavily armed Egyptian force just across the border. Egyptian officials, however, insist the deployment is not an act of aggression. They stress that the move is purely to protect national security, especially as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza worsens by the day. Yet, observers argue that Egypt's explanation cannot mask the obvious. This deployment is a strategic signal that Cairo is prepared to reposition itself in the regional power struggle. The pressing concern now is whether this defensive stance could escalate into something larger. If Israel continues to force Palestinians from their land, will Egypt remain restrained, or will the situation spiral into an unprecedented military confrontation? At the heart of Egypt's bold move is President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, acting not only as head of state but also as supreme commander of the armed forces. His directive to mobilize tens of thousands of troops underscores how seriously Cairo views the unfolding crisis. Analysts say this is not a symbolic gesture. It is a clear message to Israel that Egypt will not stand idly by while Palestinians are displaced. Eyewitness reports indicate that Egyptian soldiers are being stationed across multiple fortified positions in North Sinai, equipped with heavy weaponry, armored vehicles, and advanced surveillance systems. The military presence is described as the largest in decades, transforming the region into a high-security zone. In official statements, Egypt has emphasized that its actions are purely defensive, aimed at safeguarding borders and ensuring national stability. Yet, behind closed doors, Egyptian leadership has reportedly warned Israel against pushing Palestinians out of Gaza, calling such actions a direct threat to regional security. This firm stance reflects a broader shift in Cairo's policy. Egypt, once cautious about openly challenging Israel after years of peace under Camp David, now appears ready to leverage its military power to influence the course of events. The deployment is not merely about border control. Military experts highlight that this unprecedented deployment in North Sinai directly exceeds the limitations set by the 1979 Camp David Accords, the very agreement that brought peace between Egypt and Israel after decades of conflict. Under that treaty, Egypt was only permitted to station a limited number of lightly armed troops in specific zones of Sinai. Yet today, Cairo has positioned nearly 40,000 soldiers, many fully equipped for combat operations. Observers describe this as a historic turning point. For years, Egypt carefully adhered to the treaty's restrictions, prioritizing diplomatic balance with Israel. Now, however, the situation in Gaza and Israel's actions against Palestinians have pushed Cairo to redefine its security priorities. Egypt seems willing to test the boundaries of the peace agreement, even at the risk of raising tensions with Tel Aviv. Sources close to the Egyptian military report that Israel was formally informed about the deployment in advance, with Cairo stressing the move was defensive. Still, the scale of the buildup has raised serious questions. Is this purely border protection, or is Egypt quietly preparing for a larger regional escalation? The international community is watching closely. For many, this deployment represents not just a shift in military posture, but a signal that Egypt is no longer willing to remain passive in the face of what it calls forced displacement of Palestinians. The Egyptian government, under the command of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has clarified that the troop deployment is strictly defensive in nature. Cairo insists its only goal is to secure the border region, preventing spillover from the escalating violence in Gaza and ensuring that Egypt's sovereignty is not compromised. Officials emphasize that Egypt does not seek confrontation, but it also cannot remain indifferent while chaos unfolds just across its frontier. Despite these assurances, analysts note that Israel views the move with suspicion. The presence of tens of thousands of heavily armed Egyptian troops so close to the border represents a strategic shift that Tel Aviv cannot ignore. Some experts warn that even minor incidents in this volatile area could trigger misunderstandings or clashes, potentially destabilizing one of the most fragile peace arrangements in the Middle East. At the same time, Egyptian media outlets frame the deployment as a moral duty, portraying the military buildup as both a shield for Egyptian citizens and a stance of solidarity with Palestinians facing displacement. This dual narrative, security on one side, humanitarian responsibility on the other, captures the delicate balance Cairo is trying to maintain as tensions rise across the region. International reactions to Egypt's unprecedented troop deployment have been swift. Several Arab nations have voiced support, praising Cairo for standing firm against what they describe as Israel's ongoing campaign to force Palestinians from their homeland. Regional allies see Egypt's move as a message of deterrence, signaling that Arab states will no longer tolerate unchecked aggression in Gaza. On the other hand, Western capitals are uneasy. Washington and European powers are carefully monitoring developments, aware that the 1979 Camp David Accords have been the cornerstone of Middle East stability for decades. Any perception that Egypt is drifting away from that framework raises concerns about the potential collapse of one of the region's few lasting peace treaties. Meanwhile, Israel's government remains largely silent in public, but insiders report growing anxiety within Tel Aviv. Military strategists fear that if Egypt continues reinforcing its border, it could embolden other regional powers to adopt a harder stance, creating a multi-front pressure campaign against Israel. This tension underscores how fragile the current balance truly is, with every move scrutinized on the global stage. Inside Egypt, the deployment of 40,000 soldiers to North Sinai is also seen as a show of strength for domestic audiences. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who serves as the supreme commander of the armed forces, is using this moment to reinforce his image as a protector of national sovereignty. With tensions across the Middle East escalating, Egyptians are rallying behind their military, viewing the move as a necessary step to safeguard their borders and regional influence. Analysts point out that the scale of this mobilization far exceeds routine border security. It suggests that Cairo is preparing for worst-case scenarios, including the possibility of a wider conflict spilling over from Gaza. Military checkpoints, fortified positions, and troop convoys have become a common sight in North Sinai, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. At the same time, the government is careful in its messaging. Officials repeatedly stress that Egypt has no intention of abandoning the Camp David Accords. Instead, they insist the troop buildup is purely defensive, aimed at preventing instability from crossing into Egyptian territory. This balancing act, reassuring Israel while standing firm for Palestine, captures the delicate diplomacy Cairo must navigate in this volatile moment. As the situation unfolds, the deployment of 40,000 Egyptian soldiers in North Sinai stands as one of the most significant military maneuvers in the region since the signing of the Camp David Accords. It is a clear indication that Cairo is not willing to remain passive while Israel continues its aggressive policies toward Palestinians. The presence of such a massive force sends a dual message, a warning to Israel and a reassurance to Palestinians that Egypt is watching closely. Regional observers note that the Middle East is now at a critical juncture. Any miscalculation could risk destabilizing the fragile balance that has held for decades. Egypt's military buildup underscores the gravity of the crisis, while its careful diplomatic language highlights Cairo's desire to avoid a direct confrontation. In the end, the question remains: will this move push both sides toward a new phase of dialogue, or will it accelerate the path to greater conflict? The world watches, as the tension along the borders of Gaza, Israel, and Egypt grows heavier by the day.